We're learning the second Sikha on Parshas Behaaloscha in Chelek Chav Ches on page 68. The shir today is being learned L'le Nishmas Rabbi Yosef ben Yamin ben Rabbi Menashe Koltman. In heintige Sedre, nachdem wie die Teure erzählt, wegen dem Pesach, she'asi Yisrael ba'midbar, ba'shana hashenis, letzesa meretz Mitzrayim. In this week's parsha, where the Teure relates how the Yidden brought a carbon Pesach after they came out of Mitzrayim and the Yidden were in the Midbar, state, the Pasuk tells us as follows. And there were those men that were impure and they couldn't bring the carbon Pesach. And they came and they said, we are impure. Why are we being left out and we can't bring this carbon in its time? So the question on this is, what was their question when they were asking why are we being left out? They themselves emphasized the point. And they're saying this as an introduction to their argument that we are impure. Das heißt, sie haben gewusst, als das ist die Sibbe, zu lieb welche sie kennen nicht machen den Pesach. They knew that this is the reason that they cannot offer the carbon Pesach. Und wie man schon früher angesagt, as it already says in the Pasuk earlier, that you have to send out from the camps, and one category is those that are impure. Is was die Teine, anachnu tmeim goimer, and therefore lamini gara. So what are they coming and complaining about that we are impure, and why are we being left out? Rashi is mevayer, so Rashi explains. Lamini gara, Rashi quotes the two words lamini gara from the pasuk, and he says, Amar lehem, Moshe Rabbeinu said to them, Ein kotshim kreven betome. A carbon cannot be brought when you're impure. Amrulai, so they responded and still asked, Yizarek hadam aleinu b'kayrim tahirim, ve'yachal habasar l'tmeim. Let the blood be sprayed on the mizbeach by kayanim that are pure, and the meat of the carbon could then and will then be eaten by those that are impure. This was what their argument of Lamani Gara is. Zogim Mefarshim, so Mefarshim explain regarding the way to read this Rashi. What's the right version in the words of Rashi? As das was steht in Rashi, v'yachal habasar l'tmeim, the quote, as it says here in the Rashi that we have, that they were arguing that the meat could be eaten even by those that are impure, is atah sefer. It's a mistake to read it in this way in Rashi. One that's impure may not eat from kachim. When it's darf stehen wie in Sifri, rather, you have to read in Rashi as it says it in the Sifri, the Makif from the Pirish Rashi, the source of this Rashi, v'ya'achal habasar l'tahirim, that the basar will be eaten by those that are pure. Now, if that's how you read the Rashi, so what is it that Rashi is explaining that they were arguing? And the Namazber and the Mefarshim explain. As Kavanas Rashi mit v'ya'achal habasar l'tahirim is, the intention of the words of Rashi when they said that the basar should be eaten by those that are pure is al derech v'milenetain in Sifri, similar to the way it's explained in the Sifri, Leiten man da Omar, that this is according to the opinion which is brought in the Sifri, as chal shvi shelehem fundit meim lenefesh adam liyasar of Pesach, that they were tamei, and the last day of their tumah, which is the seventh day, was on that day, on Erev Pesach. Or b'meile, and if that's the case, kenen ze b'leil Pesach shenessen, so that night, they will have the ability, being pure, to eat from the carbon Pesach. Und das ist gewesen sehr teine. So this is what they were arguing. Yizarek adam aleinu chulu. The blood should be sprayed on the mizbeach for our sake, when we're still tummy. And then v'yachal habasar l'tahirim. We'll eat the meat when we are already pure. Ava pivos b'yom yudal zene noch tmeim. On Yudal at Erev Pesach, they still are impure. Kemen ab ezoyrik zayin, of zay dem dam, but still, the blood could be sprayed on the mizbeach for them. Because in the time when they have to eat the carbon, at the night of the 15th of Nisan, they will be pure. This was their argument. However, This explanation in Rashi is difficult to accept. Varum? Because Aleph, number one, Rashi the montnit afilunit beremez as chol shvi shalem li said of Pesach. Rashi does not mention, doesn't even hint to the fact that the case of these people that were tamei is that it was their last day of tumah and at night they would be pure. Besides that, in the pasuk, in the lashon of the pasuk, they clearly said when they were complaining, we are impure, why should we be left out? They weren't making the point that we will be pure. No, verkehrt, the opposite. Although we are impure, von deswegen, but nevertheless, why should we be left out from this? So there has to be another explanation that fits into the language of the pasuk and to what Rashi says, not to something that Rashi doesn't hint to. Andere learning, other commentaries explain the pshat in Divrei Sefri that they argued that the meat could be eaten by those that are pure, and that they said as follows: Shiyamanu shar anoshim imoem ala Pesach v'yechlu shar anoshim. That on this carbon Pesach that will be theirs, they will be included and counted for this animal, for this carbon, but others that are pure should also be included in this carbon, and then the others will eat it. So this haste, what this means is as follows: the carbon is being brought, the blood is being sprayed, including them, the tmeim, those that are impure. So it will be counted for them that they are bringing the carbon in its right time. And then, who will eat the carbon? They can't eat it, but others that are included in this carbon will then eat the carbon. According to this pshat, the Sifri brings what we could learn out from what we find by a carbon chatos was dama nizrak ala tumeh hatmeim. The blood is sprayed on the Pesach for the owner that's bringing the carbon while he's still impure. And then the meat of the carbon is eaten by those that are pure, which means as follows: Chodsh Bailem, the owner of the carbon, which is either a Yeledes or Mitzayra, a woman that gives birth that's impure, or a Mitzayra that's not yet pure, Zananoch Tome. From deswegen is Domen Izrek ala Tome. The blood is sprayed on the Mizbech for the one that brings it while it's still Tome. But then Ubisara Nechal ala Tahirim, Kainim Tahirim, and the meat is later eaten by the Kainim that are pure. So we see this concept, and we could apply it from there, that it definitely would apply by the carbon Pesach as well. So this could also be what Rashi is saying when he says that the meat will be eaten by those that are pure. As andere, that others, not like we that are impure, nor tohirim, they're pure, they will be included in this carbon, and they will eat from the carbon Pesach. However, this too is difficult to say that this is what Rashi means. Because when it comes to the carbon Pesach, it's different than other karbanos. The main point of the carbon Pesach is the fact that it's being brought for the owner of the carbon to eat it. Therefore, we find by the carbon Pesach something that's unique, that one that wants to be included in the carbon Pesach has to be counted for from the beginning of this carbon, and that is Ishlefi Ochloi Tochesu Alaseh. That you count those, that how much they will be eating from it to be included in this carbon. So if that's the case, what is the Eiftu from Yizarek Adam Aleinu? What are they trying to accomplish when they are arguing and saying that the Pesach, the blood, could be spread on the base on the Mizbeach for our sake? B'shas is felt the Ikra Mitzvah, when they will be missing the primary point here. Achilas HaPesach. This is a carbon that the main thing is to eat from this carbon Pesach. Furthermore, since as mentioned, you have to be counted, to be included in this carbon, even before the carbon is brought. So it makes sense to say, as there was is nit bechlal von lefi achloi, nit roit so achilas HaPesach, that one that's not included in the what the pasuk says, that it has to be for those that are eating. He cannot eat from the Pesach. Kenit nimne veren ala Pesach. He cannot be counted from the beginning to be a participant in this carbon. So then even the first part of the carbon, to spray the blood on the Mizbeach, will not apply to him. So what was their argument that they could be included in this Pesach? Only Mefarshim Zanem Mevayer, and as the commentaries explain, as the Fahr at Moshe Rabbeinu hat angenommen sehr Kavachayim von Chatos und gesagt, im du wärst Magaymer. Moshe Rabbeinu did not accept what they suggested to learn from the Karban Chatos, and instead Moshe said, I have to stand and listen what Hashem will say to do. By the Karban Chatos, who's the one that eats from the Karban? The Kayanim. Nit di Bailam Tmeim. The owners that are impure do not eat from the Karban. On Afila by Kachim Kalam versus Da Achilas Bailam, other Karbanis that are in a different category, and there the owner does eat some of the Karban, is Doch di Achila an Inyan versus Nit Ma'akiv Zrikas Adam. The fact that they eat from the Karban is not a necessary thing for the Karban that's brought and the blood that's sprayed. Is b'meila netokin rai the fun of Karban Pesach. So you can't bring any proof from the Chatos to the Karban Pesach. Was ikir mitzvasa is achilas bailam. Where here the main mitzvah is the eating of the owner. As meken zaydik zayin of bailam velachazan nit roitz achilas Pesach. So you can't say that here the same point applies, that the first part of the Karban and which is the spraying of the blood should be for their sake, even if they can't eat it. If the main point of the Karban is the eating, and that they can't do, so they can't be included in this Karban altogether. So therefore it's difficult to accept this pshat in Rashi. Additionally, this is also a main point there, the Perish Rashi da is nitokin remez afila of kolanal. There is no hint at all for this pshat that the Mefarshim say in the Sifri. So to understand what Rashi is saying here, we'll understand this behekten kame de yukim beloshen Rashi, by paying a closer attention to the language of Rashi. Aleph, number 1. Rashi is maitik blois diverte lomani gora on is afiller nit meise v'goymer. Rashi quotes from the pasuk only the 2 words of lomani gora, and does not add v'goymer to hint to the continuation of the pasuk. Ulachayre, now seemingly, mit sein Pirish, Yizarek Adam Chulu, is Rashi mefarish die weite de Gewerte. Levilti Hakrev is Karban Hashem. When Rashi explains what their argument was, that let the blood be sprayed for our sake, he's explaining the continuation of the pasuk, the bringing of the Karban on the Mizbeach. Rashi's kanala for the nit meramis. But Rashi does not at all even hint to the continuation of the pasuk. Why not? As the Rebbe many times says, the Dibra Maschel, the words that Rashi quotes from the pasuk, is the key to understanding what Rashi is saying. Beis, another point there is, Vazak Rashi. What does Rashi say right in the beginning? Omar Lahem, Moshe Rabbeinu said to the ones that were impure, Ein kotchim krevim betuma. Kotchim cannot be brought if you're impure. Why is it necessary to say this? This is an obvious fact that they definitely knew. Rashi should have began with their argument, how they're going to justify why they should be included in bringing the Karban. Mefarshim lernen, so commentaries here explain, as das, let's say, Moshe früher gesagt. This, that it's kotchim and their tummy, they can't bring it, this was already said to them earlier. Then, when he did not allow them to bring the Karban Pesach, was the Fahr, and therefore they came with this complaint, why should we be left out? And this complaint, when they said Lamani Gora, that came later on, and then their argument is Yizarek Adam. So Moshe Rabbeinu, when Rashi says that Moshe said Kotchim Krevim Betuma, it's not Ein Kotchim Krevim Betuma, that is, it's not a response to the Lamani Gora. That Moshe Rabbeinu told them already earlier. Aber from Pashtus Hemshech Loshen Rashi is mashma, but from the simple flow of how Rashi says this, as Amalei, or Amalehem, Ein Kotchim Chulu, that Kotchim cannot be brought when one is impure, is gekommen als Enfer of Lamani Gora, that this did come as an answer to their complaint, why should we be left out? Und erst danach is gekommen a zweite Shaila. Only later did they ask a second question, that if so, we have something that could be done. Yizarek Adam aleinu chulu, the blood could still be sprayed for our sake, and so on. That's what it seems from Rashi, that there was a question, an answer, and then a second question. Isn't it move on? If so, it's not understood. Where does Rashi take this from? Aleph, in was besteht die Shaila Lamani Gora? What is this question that they're asking? Why should we be left out? Eidem azag di svara fin Yizarek Adam gomer. Before the next question, where they explain what their complaint is, that the blood could be sprayed on us. So whatever this question is, how do we understand what the answer of Moshe Rabbeinu is, that a carbon cannot be brought when you're tummy? Additionally, from Vanet nemt Rashi mi pshuta shel mikra. From where does Rashi take this? In the reading of the pasuk simply, as da is given nit ein shaila, that here they're asking not only one question, no lama nigara labilti hakriv gaimer. That's what it seems. They're asking one question: why can't we bring the carbon? Not ashakal v'tarya. Zwischen zeh mit Moshe. Rather, there's a discussion here between them and Moshe. Frier de shaila lama nigara. There's one question: why should we be left out? Moshe responds that you can't bring the carbon while you're tummy. And then the second question, that the blood should be sprayed on us. Where is there a hint for this in the pasuk? Gimel, the third question here in the language of Rashi is Yizarek Adam Aleinu. Rashi adds B'kayanim Tahirim. The blood will be sprayed on the mizbeach by the kayanim that are pure. So the question is, Mai Kamashmalan. What is Rashi letting us know when he says that it's by the kayanim that are pure? Even if it was their opinion that they could bring the carbon while they're tummy. And not only the blood is being sprayed for their sake. But it's obvious that the actual Aveda in the Mikdash, to spray the blood on the Mizbeach, or in that case the Mishkan, is done by the Kainim. So then these Kainim are pure. Was is the Rashi Meisif b'Kainim Tahirim? Why is Rashi adding here this point that they said that the blood will be sprayed by those Kainim that are pure? Nach mer plie. This is astounding even more. Die Werte stehen nicht in Sifri. These words, B'Kainim Tahirim, do not say in the place where Rashi is quoting from the Sifri. Nor is an Ahisafis beer from Rashi. This is Rashi adding an explanation here. Is Tamua, if so, it's difficult to understand. Was felten dem Inyan Yizarek Adam Aleinu, was Rashi darf meisav sein B'Kainim Tahirim. What's not understood, the way the Sifri says that Yizarek Adam Aleinu, the blood will be sprayed for our sake, and Rashi has to add through the Kainim which are Tahirim. So to explain all of this, to understand what this argument is, or this discussion rather, between Moshe and the ones that are Tameh, and to see what it is Rashi is really saying in all these different words that Rashi says here. When you learn this pasuk where they complained and said, why should we be left out from bringing this carbon in its time? So the question comes up immediately. Up until this point, the Torah uses the term of asiyah, to make or to offer the carbon Pesach. As the Rabbi quotes here, all the places. V'yasa b'nei Yisrael as Pesach, tasu eser lastas Pesach, v'yasu as Pesach, v'lo yochlu lastas Pesach. Auf was haben die Tmei und Nefesh Adam mishane gewen und gesagt, nit lebilti asaysa Pesach. So why did they change the terminology? And they didn't complain and say, why can't we do or offer the carbon Pesach? Not lebilti hakriv as carbon Hashem. They specifically stressed that why can't we bring a carbon to sacrifice the carbon of Hashem? Why the change of this expression? Is the fun mashma. So it's from this that it seems as das is an inyan was is by zeh erst don is chadish geworden. That this is actually a new point, something new that they learned only now. Frier hat man noch gewusst, as es ist da asiyas Pesach. Up until this point, it was known that there is the offering of the Pesach. Und jetzt is bei zeh geworden a chiddush. Now there was something novel. As carbon a Pesach as an inyan von hakriv as carbon Hashem. That this is a sacrifice that they are sacrificing, bringing for Hashem. As will be explained in the next sif at length. What is it that happened in between here, from which they understood this new point? Is Rashi maitik from pasuk lamanigara? So therefore Rashi quotes from the pasuk the two words of lamanigara, und sagt, and explains, Ama lahem ein kachim kreven betume. That Moshe Rabbeinu told them, kachim cannot be brought when you're tummy. And then Rashi goes on to say, that they had another question, let the blood be sprayed by the kainim and the meat will be eaten by those that are tar. What is Rashi clarifying here? Rashi quotes from the pasuk only these two words of Lomani Goda, and he does not add of a geimer. Macht Rashi klar, what Rashi is making clear is, over here is, as Loma Nigoda is given a shaila b'fnei atzma. These two words of Loma Nigoda is one question for itself. Was of them shaila hat Moshe geantwortet, ein kachim kreven betumme. And Moshe Rabbeinu answered them that kachim cannot be brought when you're impure. B'shas Moshe hat sie gesagt dem Empfer, as ein kachim kreven betumme, when they got this answer, that it's kachim and it can't be sacrificed. When you're impure, is by Zaynis Chadish geworden, it was then that they heard a new point, as Pesach is an inyan von akrav as kachim, carbon Hashem. That Pesach is an offering of a sacrifice that is being brought as a carbon. Hat Chiddush mechadish given by Zay, die zweite Shaila. So now, this new understanding brought them to their second point, and that's their second question, that Fibalt, as Labilti Hakriv, as Carbon Hashem, is Yizarek Adam Aleinu Chulu. That they were asking that why can this, even as a carbon, not be brought, and that is Yizarek Adam Aleinu, as will be explained, what it is that they suggested. And the Rebbe adds here in the footnote that you look in the language of the pasuk, it says Lama Nigoda, and then it says Labilti Hakriv. It doesn't say Lama Nigoda Lahakriv. Labilti Hakriv indicates that there's a new point there. Two questions that they are asking. This explains why Rashi adds an explanation and emphasizes that they now said, let the blood be sprayed by the kainim, which are pure. The mit is Rashi madgish. With this, Rashi is emphasizing, as erst itzt is bei Zaynis Chadish geworden, as Pesach is a carbon Hashem kachim. It was only at this point that they realized that this is a carbon, it's kachim, and it requires to have the spraying of the blood on the mizbeach by the kainim that are pure. But earlier, when they had their complaint in the beginning and they asked, why are we being left out? As carbon at Pesach is nit ken carbon Hashem. So their understanding was that the carbon of Pesach is not a carbon, it's not a sacrifice. Was b'meila fatet es nit ken zrika al gabi ha-mizbeach b'kainim ta'edim, so it doesn't even require to have the blood spread on the mizbeach with pure kainim. Und der Vater haben sie gehalten, als megen das bringen betumme. And that was their original complaint, that they thought that they could bring this carbon, or not as a carbon actually, they can bring this Pesach even while they're tummy. Those are the two stages of the discussion between them and Moshe, as we see it in the pasuk. But now we need to explain what exactly is the understanding here. Why originally did they understand that this is not a carbon, and then it changed? Yes, but so the explanation for this is ubahagdim with the following introduction. Al derech hapshat, in the simple understanding when we learn the psukim, hat Pesach Mitzrayim nit gehat ken geder from carbon. When the Yidden brought this carbon Pesach a year earlier, when they were in Mitzrayim, it was not in the category of a carbon. Al pipshutei shel mikra. In the simple understanding of the pasuk, is Pesach Mitzrayim given a mitzvah muyuchedes. It was a special mitzvah for Yidden to fulfill at that point. To shechter aseh, to slaughter a lamb, und essen im Beleil Pesach, and then to eat it on the night of Pesach, tzli eish, roasted in the fire, zusammen mit matzah u'mereirim, together with matzah and mara v'suloi, and that's all. The Bai is not given kein inyan v'tzivi von akrav as carbon l'Hashem. It doesn't say here anything about there being a command that this should be sacrificed as a carbon for Hashem's sake. Und das, was es hat gedarft sein, v'lokchu min adam, v'nosnu al shtei hamezuzos gomer, the fact that we find that there was something similar to a carbon that they did have to take from the blood and place it on the two doorposts, is nit given al derech v'zrikas adam al hamizbeach. This was not because it was a carbon and therefore we're doing something that's like a carbon on the mizbeach. No kimufurish bikra, rather, as it says clearly in the pasuk, to machen an ois ifin bayis. The point here was to have blood on the door for there to be a sign on the home. As b'shaz va'avarti beretz mitzrayim v'yikesi goyme v'isi yis adam goyme upasachti aleichem goyme. As the pasuk says, it's at the time of makas b'chayris. And Hashem will be coming to kill all the firstborns of the Egyptians, and Hashem will see the blood in the Jewish home, and he will skip this home. That's what the point of the blood was, but not to resemble anything of a carbon. Was the Frage findet man nicht bei Pesach Mitzrayim, as es soll angerufen werden b'shem carbon. We don't find anywhere in Pesach Mitzrayim that it's referred to as a carbon. Nor blois b'shem zevach. V'amartem zevach Pesachu. Rather, it's just called a zevach, which means to slaughter. Zevach Pesachu. Was the word zevach meit nedafka a carbon l'Hashem. Zevach is not a term that's used when you sacrifice something for Hashem's sake. No yed shchite la'achile werd gerufen zevach. Anytime you're slaughtering for the sake of eating, it's referred to as a zevach. That's what the carbon Pesach in Mitzrayim was. Und das ist gewähnt die Teine von die Tmeil und Nefesh Adam. So this was the complaint in the beginning of those that were impure. Da redt sich doch wegen der Shana Shenes L'Tzeisa Meretz Mitzrayim. This is the second year right after they came out of Mitzrayim, the next opportunity they had to bring a carbon Pesach. Was for them is blois given ein Pesach. So there was only one Pesach before. The Pesach Mitzrayim. The Pesach that they brought in Mitzrayim. Is davon verstandig, if so it's understood, as the Shas mat angesagt, wie Yasu b'nei Yisrael as a Pesach b'moyede. Kechol kechaisav kechol mishpat of tasu eisai. Yidden were then commanded that they should bring the Pesach in its time with all of the details of the halachas that apply to it. Hat es gemeint, as der Pesach Midbar soll sein in demselben Eufen Begede von Pesach Mitzrayim. So they understood that this means that it's going to be the same Pesach and in the same category as it is when they brought it a year ago in Mitzrayim. Ubefrat al pipirish Rashi leil, especially according to another detail here, which Rashi already explained earlier. Tola kosov mitzvazu bibiyasam la'aretz. The Torah says that this mitzvah for future generations is dependent on them, on Yidden being in Eretz Yisrael. They weren't obligated to bring it in the midbar. Ella bepesach echad she'asu b'shana shenis al pi adibur. There was only one time, the first year, when they were in the midbar, that they brought this Pesach according to the command of Hashem. But it was an exception. Now, if that's the case, legt sich zu sagen, so then it's logical to say, as the Pesach Midbar hat nit gehat dem Gede from Pesach Deiris, welche is verbunden mit Biasam Loretz. That this Pesach is not in the category of the Pesach that is brought in future generations, which must be only when they enter into Eretz Yisrael. Must is given a hemshech from Pesach Mitzrayim. This Pesach is just one more Pesach that they're bringing here in the Midbar, following the year before when they were in Mitzrayim. Und bei die welche haben gemacht Pesach Mitzrayim, and for those that brought the Pesach the year before in Mitzrayim. So even if in the future when they come into Eretz Yisrael, and the Pesach for the future generations is a carbon Pesach, but this Pesach, which is unique only once in the Midbar, is different, and it's the same or similar to the Pesach in Mitzrayim, which is not defined as a carbon. So based on this, so the men came and argued, darf man sagen, we must say, as the Tzivui v'yasu b'nei Yisrael as ha-Pasach b'moyedoi meant asiyas ha-Pesach, punt, v'Pesach Mitzrayim. When Hashem is saying that you should prepare the carbon Pesach, the Pesach in its time, this is the asiyah of the Pesach, to prepare the Pesach, just like it was in Mitzrayim. Welche is nit, kein carbon, was wird gebracht al gabe am Mizbeach, and therefore it's not a carbon that should be brought at all on the Mizbeach. No adarabe. On the contrary, yederer, afilat meyin, everybody, including those that are impure, is a veach haseh bebeisai, can slaughter this lamb at his home. Leben zayin mashke v'amezuzis, at the door, the entrance of his home, the lintel and the doorposts. Und estes bebeisai dafke, and eats it in his home. Beleil chamisha b'Nisan on the 15th of Nisan. Zusammen punkt wie erst matzu und morer, she'enem kotchem klal, together with and exactly like the matzah and the morer that one eats on the night of Pesach that are not at all in the category of a carbon. Und der Rebbe, wenn Moshe hat sie nicht gelassen, sich zu mishtatev sein in Asiyas HaPesach, when Moshe Rabbeinu did not allow them to participate in the offering of the Pesach, here they came and complained, why are we being left out from this? It's not a carbon. It should be just like the Pesach in Mitzrayim. Und das hat Moshe sie mechadish gewähnt. And here Moshe Rabbeinu came and told them a new point. Ein kotchem kreven betume. So this Moshe Rabbeinu responds to them after they complained, Lomani Gora, and Moshe Rabbeinu explains that Pesach is nit blois azevach. That this Pesach is not just slaughtering an animal to eat. Nor kotchem. It's actually in the category of kachim. It is a carbon that's brought in the mizbeach. Ubemele, and therefore is ayeshaila be'inyan. Was the answer is en kachim kreven betume. You're asking a question about something where the answer for this is that you're not understanding what the category of this Pesach is. It's in the category of a carbon. So if so, you should understand that kachim cannot be brought when you're impure. That was the first question and answer of the ones that were Tameh and Moshe Rabbeinu's response. Now, based on this, we could also understand what was their second question when they then went on to say, let the blood be sprayed on the mizbeach for our sake, and then the meat will be eaten by those that are pure. Since they were impure, so it must be that Rashi here means that others that are pure will eat it, but they themselves will not eat. So what is Rashi saying over here? Vibalt, as by Pesach Mitzrayim, is nit gewen ken inyan von akraval Hashem al gabe hamizbeach. Since when Yidden were in Mitzrayim, as explained, then there was no concept of the Pesach being in the category of a carbon that they're sacrificing for Hashem. Al gabe hamizbeach on a mizbeach. Nor blois the mitzvah b'fnei atzmo von zevach v'achilas ha-Pesach. But it was just a mitzvah of slaughtering and eating the Pesach. So those that are impure, so their opinion now was as follows. As those was jetzt noch hakomas ha-mishkan. Is es a gather carbon? The fact that now, as Moshe Rabbeinu explained them, the Pesach is a carbon Pesach. Is das a zugekommene basundere inyan. This is an added and separate aspect of what this Pesach is. Welche is nit gereya, upshite nit shoylol, but it's not going to minimize and definitely not negate the mitzvah von achilas ha-Pesach, wie es gewen by Pesach bis jetzt. And it's not going to take away from what the mitzvah of the Pesach was up until this point, the way it was the year before when they were in Mitzrayim. Und verwasel den werden ashinui ubefrat ashlile in mitzvah achilas ha-Pesach. Why should you say that there's a change, and a change to the point that this completely negates the status of what this Pesach is up until this point, that they cannot eat from this carbon Pesach. So even if, yes, now there's an added feature to what this Pesach is, that it has a geder, it's defined as a carbon, but that's one aspect of it. But it still retains the original aspect of what Pesach is. It's a mitzvah of eating, a zevach, a slaughtering of an animal, of a Pesach. So if so, kumtais, it comes out, as in Pesach zene faran, zwei besondere inyanim. That the Pesach now has in it two separate aspects, and these two are not dependent one on the other. Aleph, number one, men brengt a carbon Hashem, auf dem Mizbeach, als Zeche, wo Hidoye, auf den Inyan von Goles Mitzrayim, wo Pesach Hashem. They're bringing a carbon, offering a sacrifice on the Mizbeach, and this is to commemorate and to thank Hashem for the goal of the redemption of Mitzrayim, and that, Pesach Hashem, the fact that Hashem Hashem jumped over the homes of the Eden and saved them. That's one aspect, the carbon. Beis, es is da the mitzvah von achilas ha-Pesach, b'leil tezvav, and then there is the mitzvah of the Pesach, to eat from the Pesach at the night on tezvav. Nit als achilas carbon dafke. This is not eating it as a carbon specifically, not al derech with the mitzvah von achilas matzah and maror, just like the mitzvah of eating matzah and maror, which is not a carbon at all. So this is what their complaint was, and this is the second complaint that they had. Levilti hakriv es carbon Hashem b'moyadai. And what they were saying is as follows: Vibalt, as their inyan was Pesach, is a carbon Hashem, is a bazunder inyan von achilas ha-Pesach. That they understood now that this Pesach has in it two aspects: the carbon Pesach, and then the Pesach, which you eat, and they're not dependent on one another. If so, you can separate the two, so you can have one without the other. Yizare kadam aleinu chulu, and v'yachal abasal l'tayrim. The blood will be sprayed for our sake, but the eating of the Pesach will be for those that are pure. And here, as the Rebbe will explain, it actually comes out sort of the opposite of what would be expected over here. There's the aspect of the carbon, and then there's the eating, which is not a carbon. But The way they applied this would be that they would not be able to eat it, but the zrike of a carbon should be for their sake. Afapi v'zayndik a carbon Hashem kachim tane zayn nit essen von dem Pesach. Since it is a carbon and it's kachim, they may not eat from it. One that's impure may not eat from kachim. And therefore, who's going to eat from this Pesach? Those that are pure, others. So that's the aspect of the carbon. So because now it is a carbon, so that affects even the achila as well. That it's a carbon and you're eating from a carbon, and that's only for those that are pure. However, there's another aspect to this, and that is the fact that it's a carbon, and it's not dependent on whether you can eat from it or not. Even if you cannot eat from it, but that's one aspect of this. That's the aspect of eating related to a carbon, one that's impure cannot. But the other aspect of this, which is the carbon, and at the time when you spray the blood, that they could have. As carbon Hashem b'mayadai, that the carbon could be brought in its time for their sake, was ken getan werden, bli zera reingen in Mishkan, because this aspect of the carbon could be done for their sake without them being impure entering into the Mishkan. And if so, they argued, let the blood be sprayed by the kainim that are tar for our sake, because we don't have to enter for this. So this is all based on the point that there are two aspects of this carbon that are not dependent one on the other. The eating of the carbon and the hakrav of the carbon are two separate things. So therefore, they said, even if the eating is not for us, because now when you eat, you're not just eating a Pesach, but you're eating also the carbon Pesach, and when you're impure, you can't. So fine, the achila aspect is not for us. But carbon Pesach has another aspect to it, which is not dependent on the eating. And in that aspect of the carbon, there's a part of the carbon that could be brought for us, and that's the zrika, the akrava on the mizbeach, could be done for our sake without even entering into the place of the Mishkan. That was their argument at this point. And in the answer to this, the Rebbe says in the footnote that in truth, it's not so. After it was added that this is a carbon, so it's really all one thing. And you can't separate this into two separate aspects, and therefore they had to bring a carbon Pesach Sheni. According to this explanation in Rashi, it would be possible to explain the other version that there is in Rashi, that their argument was that the meat should be eaten by themselves, even though they're impure. From this itself, that many of the commentaries in Rashi correct here, the version is muchach as shem b'meim is given the girsa on a futsal etmein. So it's clear that even many years ago in their time, the widespread version of the Rashi was that it said the word litmein, that they argued that they, as being tamei, should eat from it. Especially it was explained many times as b'shas mevul mevarezayin. What this is the nusucha amiti, when you want to try to figure out what is the correct version in the words of Rashi, you have to look at the cause of a mistake that could happen in the words of Rashi. There's no reason to believe that a mistake was made deliberately in the words of Rashi. So in our case, if we were to say that in Rashi it was written litmeim, that for the ones that are impure, it would be understood why one that wrote this down, or the printer, decided to change it to the word litahayim because he didn't understand. How could it be? How could Rashi say litmeim if it doesn't make sense? And in the Sifri it says tahayim. If what Rashi himself originally wrote tahayim, and that's what it said, why should anybody come and switch from the Tahayim, which is simple and understood, and write that it's L'Tmeim? Was is Aleph Heipich Nusach HaSifri? It's opposite of what it says in the Sifri. Und Beis Ve'ikir Heipich von dem Din Mefurish und Mefurisim Lakoil as Atome Tarnet Essen Kin Kotchem. The opposite of a clear and din that everybody knows, that one that's Tomei cannot eat from Kotchem. So how does such a mistake happen? Someone deliberately changed from Tahirim to Tmeim. So therefore there's room to say that the version of Tameim that there is in Rashi is actually correct. So how can we explain this? Based on what was explained here before, it could be understood. Is the beer bezeh? The explanation here is Vibalt as the mitzvah von Achilas HaPesach is lefi svaras ha'anoshim ha'hema. Nit a geder von Achilas Korban, nor a mitzvah bifnei atzma nit verbunden mit akrovas Korban. In their understanding, the eating of the Pesach is not the aspect of the Korban of the Pesach. There is an added feature now that this is also a Korban that has to be brought in the Mizbeach, and the blood has to be spread in the Mizbeach. But the eating of the Pesach is the original mitzvah as it was in Mitzrayim to eat from a Pesach. Hatanar zu sagen, if so, there's room to say, Litten limud al derech hapshat, learning according to Pshat of the Pasik, as the basar ha-Pesach can gegessen werden afile betumme, that the meat of this Pesach could be eaten even by one that's tummy. Das was the Torah asert at tummy. So essen kachim, this that the Torah says that it's prohibited for one that is impure to eat from kachim is dafke when estes al tzachilas kachim. That's only if he's eating from this as a carbon, being kachim. Okidiyik lashon hakasav, as you see it in the language of the pasuk itself. V'hanefesh asher teichel basa mi zevach hashlamim asher laHashem v'tumasa yalav. He eats from what was slaughtered as a shlamim, which is for Hashem's sake, and he has impurity on him. Then he should not eat from it. Masha'enken, achilas ha-Pesach is nitat achilas kachim. Here, though, by the Pesach, which is also in the category of a carbon, but the eating of it, though, is not as the carbon. Not als a mitzvah b'fnei atzma. This, the eating, is as a mitzvah for itself. Was Torah hat angesagt, wenn es nicht gewinnt kachim. That the Torah commanded to eat from this even before it had the added feature of being kachim. Hat der Pfarrer nur zu sagen, if so, there's room to say, as in dem Fall, kann es gegessen werden afile betumme. That in this case, they can eat from this carbon even while they're tummy. And therefore, you could read the version of Rashi v'yachal basal etzmein. They were arguing that they can eat it even while they are tummy for the aspect of the mitzvah of eating it, not as a carbon. Now wait then beer, so now according to this explanation, explaining the version in Rashi, that they argued that the meat could be eaten even by themselves that are tamei, but if so, it's not understood in the words of the pasuk. That they could even have the mitzvah of eating from the Pesach. So why is it that when they complained and they were demanding that the carbon should be sacrificed for their sake? And they didn't mention the aspect of the eating of the carbon. Is there Indian in them? So the reason for this is, as the Indian from Pesach is a carbon Hashem. When they heard the new point, Moshe Rabbeinu told them that this is a carbon for Hashem's sake. Is das geworden bei sei der Iker ha'inyan from Pesach. This now became the main feature of what this Pesach is. Bei sei hat shaloi be'erech mehr Teufels Marken gewinnt. Das, was sie haben die Möglichkeit zu Makriv sein dem Korban Hashem b'moyadai, by them it was infinitely more important this, that they have the possibility to sacrifice a carbon for Hashem's sake in its time. Chotsch, das wird getan werden. Durch andere, even if this is something that others will also do, wie die mitzvah, was is verbunden mit Zeir Achila, Achilas HaPesach. Much more than the mitzvah, which is them, that they are eating from this, from the Pesach. Why is this? Weil the gereste teinig bei Zeh, von Ayiden is, by them and by Ayid, the greatest pleasure is, b'shar setutoiv dem lachmi le'ishai, when he could accomplish that to bring a carbon, which is bread, in the fire for Hashem, was his guidem dem ishe reich nechayach l'Hashem nachas ruach lefonai she'amarti v'naser etzeni, which brings a unique pleasure for Hashem that I said, and my will was fulfilled. So even though part of their argument, as Rashi says in this version, was that we could eat from it, but nevertheless, what the pasuk highlights in their words and in their argument is that they also said that the blood could be sprayed for our sake while we are standing outside, because we don't have to enter, and the kainim tahirim will do it. That was more important to them than the achila of the carbon. To explain this in one's service and serving Hashem and on a deeper level. The last point here, that although part of their argument was that they could eat from the Pesach because of the aspect of it not being a carbon. But nevertheless, what they demanded clearly was that they want to also have a opportunity in the hakriv, in the sacrificing of the carbon. Is v'esiz mitzad hamidin. This is the expression of the Yid's feeling of what he wants, what's his greatest pleasure. But when Hashem commands and responds and says that they will have another opportunity to bring the Pesach Sheni, as mekamashlim zayin the Pesach, to make up for this Pesach, is a ikirat gasha nitazayif an inyan carbon. Here, what is Hashem highlighting? Not the aspect of it being a carbon Pesach Hashem, that they're bringing a carbon for Hashem's sake. Not a fasiyas of Pesach, the preparing, the doing, the offering of the Pesach on achilas of Pesach, that they'll have another opportunity to eat from the Pesach. Why is the eating of the Pesach the main point that Hashem is highlighting? The main point of the Pesach is not the fact that it's sacrificed and burnt on the Mizbeach, which is halo mimato lamaila, to elevate and take an animal physically and burn it and sacrifice it and elevate it above through burning it on the Mizbeach. Maila zayin chelev v'dam al gabe Mizbeach, elevating the fats and the blood on the Mizbeach. Als carbon Hashem, a sacrifice for Hashem. Nor dafke di amshacha lamato. Rather, by the Pesach, the main point is bringing the holiness of this Pesach and connecting it to the person here below, in Guf Agashmi, in his physical body. Achilas ha'adam, by the person eating it. Dafke durich dem, specifically through the eating of the Pesach, firzich durich di kavanas habriya. This fulfills the purpose of creation in general. Lasais lo yizbarach dira b'tachtainam, to create a dwelling for Hashem in the world here below.